Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. In our previous lesson, we covered how to conjugate verbs into their passive form so that we may use them in the passive construction basically. And in that lesson, all we really did was cover the conjugating process. So now it's rightfully time to expand on the actual function of the passive construction in Japanese. So compared to the basic usage of the passive form in English, in Japanese it is a bit more complicated in that it kind of splits into two different kinds of passive forms. So in this lesson we are going to cover basically the first one, which is the more simpler one, and the one that is more similar to the English language's passive form. And so basically what we're just going to call this version of the passive form is the simple passive form, because this is the one that we simply know to be the general passive form for the English language as well. And just as a refresher, when we use the passive form in English, we do this in order to turn the direct object or the indirect object into the subject of the sentence. And likely the reason why it's called the passive form in the first place is because it makes the occurrence of the action happening a bit more passive, as in it's not the subject of the sentence that is directly enacting this action. The subject of the sentence is instead almost kind of an inevitable victim of the action happening. For example, say if we have the English sentence, the truck ran over the dog. If we want to utilize this in the passive form instead, we take the direct object, which is basically just the victim of the action. So the action here is to run over basically, and the direct object of that action is the cat. So we take the cat and we're going to change it into the subject instead for the passive form, and so the sentence turns into the cat was run over by the truck. Alternatively, if we're doing the passive form in which we're instead changing the indirect object into the subject of the sentence, we might have an example sentence such as he gave her a piece of chocolate. We see here that the action was to give and the direct object is the chocolate, but we're not going to change the chocolate into the subject of the sentence. We want to change the indirect object of the sentence. And so the person who receives the action is going to be she. And so she is the indirect object and we want to change her into the subject. So the sentence becomes, she was given a piece of chocolate from him or by him. And that in turn makes the whole sentence much more passive. And so this simple passive construction is what we're going to cover in this lesson in Japanese now. So just like we just did here, first up we're going to start off with the simple passive construction in which we're turning the direct objects into the subjects. And then we'll cover a few examples of that, and then we'll move on to making the indirect object into the subject, although neither of them are more difficult than the other. It's just the way we're going to organize things here. And so for our first example, we have the line "Watashi wa Chijo Saikyou no otoko to yobareru." And what this line is going to translate to is just basically, I am called the world's strongest man, or I am known as the world's strongest man, depending on how natural you want to make that. And so if we break down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have watashi, which is going to be I or me. We have wa marking I or me as the subject of the sentence. Then we have the term chijo saikyou no otoko, and this is going to be the world's strongest man or the strongest man in the world. We have the word chijo here, which is going to loosely translate to the world, or in its literal definition, above ground. Next up we have saikyou, which is going to mean strongest. Then we have the particle no here, doing the noun of a noun modification. Right after that is the word otoko, which is going to be man. Right after that we have the particle to, and this is going to basically just denote a quotation, and the quotation is the thing that we just covered, the chijo saikyou no otoko. That's going to be the quote, because this is going to be basically what people are saying. Then right after that we have the verb yobareru, and so this is going to be the verb yobu, to call, in its passive form, and we covered how to conjugate it in the previous lesson. All we have to do is change the bu at the end of yobu. All we have to do is change the bu at the end of yobu to ba, and then add reru. So yobareru is the passive form of yobu, to call. And so that turns into, instead, to call, something along the lines of is called or am called. And so we piece this all together, and basically we have the line watashi wa chijo saikyou no otoko to yobareru as I am called the world's strongest man, or perhaps more naturally, I am known as the world's strongest man. For our next example sentence, we have the line kono mise wa yoku shirarete iru. And what this line is going to translate to is, this shop is well known. Let's break it down bit by bit. First up we have kono mise, and kono means this, mise means shop or store basically. We have wa marking the shop or the store basically as the topic of the sentence. We have the adverb yoku, which is going to translate to well. Then we have shirarete iru, and this is going to be the verb shiru, and this verb is going to mean to know or to get to know, and it's going to be in its passive form, but the passive form itself is going to be conjugated in turn to the te form. succeeded by the verb iru to further implement the grammar pattern that is the te form plus the word iru to mean is verbing or has verb. And so again, we know how to conjugate shiru into its passive form. It's an u verb, but it ends with ru, so we change ru into ra, and then we add reru right after it. So shirareru is the passive form of shiru, then we change that into the te form, so shirareru turns into shirarete, then we add the iru right after it, and then we combine that with the whole rest of the sentence, and again we have kono mise wa yoku shirarete iru, and so this will translate to this shop or this store is well known. For our next example sentence, we have the line kino senpai ni homerareta, and what this simple line is going to translate to is just basically yesterday I was praised by senpai, which is going to be upperclassmen basically. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up we have kino, and that's just going to mean yesterday. Right after kino we have the noun senpai, but here we know that senpai is not going to be the subject or the topic of the sentence because it's succeeded by the particle ni. And so that's why we know that senpai would have been the subject of the sentence if this was the active form as opposed to the passive form. But since this is the passive form, that's not the case. And since there's no other entity in the sentence that explicitly is present to be the subject or the topic of the sentence, we can now conclude that the topic or the subject of the sentence is implied, and the implication is that it's you, the speaker. And so senpai ni is basically going to translate to from senpai. Then moving on, we have the last word in the sentence, and that is homerareta. And so this is going to be the past plain form of the passive form of the verb homeru, which means to praise. So homeru is going to be the dictionary form, and we want to change that into the passive form. And so that's going to change into homerareru, and we're going to change that into the past plain tense. So that changes into homerareta because we again denoted the past tense already just by saying kino at the beginning of the sentence. And so now all together again, kino senpai ni homerareta is going to be yesterday I was praised by senpai, or my upperclassmen. Okay, so with that done, now we'll move on to doing the passive construction, but with the indirect object of the active form of the sentence being the subject of the passive form now. And so for our example sentence, we have the line George Washington wa kanojo ni atama ga ii to iwareta. And so what this line is going to translate to is just basically George Washington was told by the girl that he is smart. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we just have George Washington, which is going to be George Washington. We have wa marking him as the topic of the sentence. We have kanojo, which translates to girl or she. We have ni right after kanojo, which means that's going to translate to basically from her or from the girl. Then we have atama ga ii, and this is going to literally translate to head is good, but it's going to more naturally and most always usually translate to just smart or intelligent. We have the to right after that to mark that as the quotation. Then we have iwareta, which is going to be the verb you, to say, in its passive past tense form. And so we should know how to conjugate that. When we have just you as its dictionary form, we drop the u, we replace that with wa, and then we add reru to get the passive form, and so then you turns into iwareru, but then we're going to want to change that into the plain past tense, so iwareru turns into iwareta. And so altogether, once again, that is George Washington wa kanojo ni atama ga ii to iwareta, as George Washington was told by the girl that he is smart. For our last example sentence, we have the simple line roommate ni sentaku o tanomareta. And what this line translates to is just basically I was asked by my roommate to do the laundry. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have roommate, and this is going to be the katakana version of the English word roommate. We have the particle ni right after roommate, so we know that roommate isn't the topic or the subject of the sentence. It's the topic or the subject of the sentence is going to be implied as me, the speaker. And so roommate ni is going to be from my roommate or by my roommate basically. And moving on, we have sentaku, which is going to be the noun for laundry basically. We have the particle o marking sentaku as the direct object of the verb that's about to come, and that verb is tanomu, which is basically to request, to ask for a favor basically. Then we're going to change that into the passive conjugation, so tanomu turns into tanomareta. And so that's going to be was asked or was asked for a favor, and so we combine that with the whole rest of the sentence, and it's just going to be I was asked from my roommate to do the laundry. And so yeah, that's how we handle using the passive construction in its simple version, in which we're just changing an active form sentence into the passive by making the direct object or the indirect object as the subject of the sentence instead of what would normally be the subject of the sentence, the one that's actually performing an action. With this construction, we can rival the usage of the English passive form. In our next lesson, we're going to delve deeper into the Japanese passive form and go through a different version of it. So it's good to solidify your knowledge of not only the verb conjugations of passive form as well as this simple passive construction, so we can easily handle what's going to be a bit more difficult.